Good day to you one and all. It is I, Justin Hawkins, and this is Justin Hawkins Rides Again. I'm looking and feeling incredibly smug, vindicated, if you will. For today, we have collated, or rather I've instructed, nay forced, my producer to collate some evidence to support the theory that all new music sounds the same, or a lot of it does anyway. And there is science and research that supports that, so I'm going to discuss it after having sung the theme tune, which doesn't sound the same as anybody else's theme tune. I think you've noticed that, haven't you? Justin Hawkins Rides Again. It's actually surprising if it sounds the same as itself 2 days running. Again. Which is part of its charm, I would hope, anyway. Nice. All right. Again. It's true. Everything does sound the same. If anyone argues with that notion, they are wrong, because we have some hard evidence now to prove it. Initially, we saw a recent article in The Guardian that discussed how the popularity of Taylor Swift is bad news for music. They said, and I quote, "The ubiquity of the pop superstar speaks to her enormous talent, while also reflecting how narrow and repetitive the industry has become. Taylor Swift recently became the first woman and only the third artist ever to have 4 albums in the top 10 of the US album charts simultaneously. That's unbelievable. While her Eras tour, Eras, that's an anagram of ears, isn't it? They've jumbled up the letters. Brilliant. I wonder if that was deliberate. Is on track to become the most lucrative tour ever, and it's expected to crack $1 billion in revenue. $1 billion. $1 billion. They go on to say, the fact that you are almost guaranteed to hear her if you switch on the radio or meander down a high street doesn't just speak to her talents, but also to the homogenization of pop music, which is a thing I've discussed before. It's not just your imagination. A growing body of research shows that all modern pop music sounds the same. In 2012, the Spanish National Research Council published an analysis of nearly 500,000 songs released between 1955 and 2010, which showed that the diversity of note combinations has consistently diminished in the last 50 years. Radio stations are pushing the boundaries of repetitiveness to new levels, noted a 2014 article in The Atlantic. Top 40 stations last year played the 10 biggest songs almost twice as much as they did a decade ago. An increasingly data-driven... I'm just going to read this because it's... Then I don't have to think about it, because if I had to think about it, that'd just be really depressing. An increasingly data-driven music industry means there is a growing focus on replicating hits and far less space for nurturing originality. Technology may have given us multiple new ways to listen to music, but increasingly we are hearing the same old tune. And there's always an argument that, there's only so many notes in an octave, isn't there? Well, that's true, of course, but there's a million... There's probably an infinite combinations if you're prepared to experiment, and not everybody is, I suppose. But what does it mean for us? When I say us, I mean the listeners, and especially younger audiences. Are we being trained to listen and like the same kind of music, the same kind of beat, the same rhythms? I mean, because when I was growing up, I used to love a Carib. You don't hear them as often. Actually, the Carib is starting to creep back in. The Carib is one of those ones, it takes 20 years or so and then it just comes back around. Trust me, there'll be a lot of bands doing Carib stuff next year. Can you really blame people who aren't musos for liking what's offered to them? If you're... Beggars can't be choosers, I suppose, and if you stick the radio on... I mean, oftentimes, which is my least favourite word in the American lexicon, I'm sorry guys, but you don't need to add the time. Sorry, I'm just going to say this too. Oftentimes and often, it means the same thing. You don't need to add that times on the end. It's not an efficient way to speak. And I've just wasted 10 seconds of everybody's time to say that. Not everybody is surrounded by peers who can introduce them to a broader music range. And where do you go to find new music or older music when there's so much of it? And where do you start? But I think the problem here might be the radio stations, because I remember when I left school and I was working on the building site with my father, we had the radio on and we were obliged to listen to whatever they played. So I would imagine Do people still do that on building sites? Use the comment section below. If you guys are working in construction, do you still listen to the radio, or do you stick a Bluetooth speaker on and have some sort of playlist so you're not obliged to hear like time checks, weather reports, and traffic updates? Most people will end up going back to what they know. They'll listen to stuff that's familiar because they know how it's going to make them feel, and it's not always necessary to challenge yourself to listen to new stuff. It's like sometimes only a vegan cheese sandwich will do it. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm not saying that Taylor Swift's music sounds like a vegan cheese sandwich. That would be incorrect. Here is some info on the Spanish National Research Council research that concluded that modern music seems to be getting worse every year. Specifically, the researchers took 500,000 recordings of all genres of music between 1955 and 2010. They ran every single song through a complex set of algorithms, and these algorithms measured 3 distinct metrics. The first one, timbral diversity, which I think is probably talking about the frequency spectrum that's prevalent in each thing. Like when you look at a graphic equalizer of a song that's playing, there's probably a trend has moved away from the scoop, which you used to see in heavy metal music. Very middly kind of harsh sounding stuff is probably prevalent at the moment, I would say, because that's the stuff that pops out on the radio and sounds louder than everything else. 2, harmonic complexity, which I suppose is talking about the relational or the way the notes relate to the chords in question, and so on. And then the third thing that they were measuring was loudness. And I don't know whether that's perceived loudness or just the level at which stuff's mastered, because there's definitely a trend now for super loud mastering. Everybody's trying to get the maximal volume that they can out of what is essentially a digital file without digital feedback, which is or digital distortion rather, which is one of the most horrible things you can listen to. But to be competitive, you've got to sound as loud, or if not louder, than the stuff that's out there. Otherwise, who's going to lean in and turn up that radio if you're just aiming to do background music, which we all are. Let's face it. You want to be soundtracking the building site. Here's what they found. Number 1, over the past few decades, the timbre of music has dropped drastically. Timbre is the texture, colour and quality of the sounds within the music being listened to. Timbre variety peaked in the 60s and has since been steadily declining. Songs increasingly have less variety in their instrumentation and recording techniques. Instead of experimenting with different instrumentation and recording techniques, the vast majority of pop music today use the same instrumentation. That would be a keyboard, a drum machine, a sampler, and some computer software. And consequently, all modern pop music sounds the same, like some fucking arsehole with his laptop has made it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Creativity's great, and it's awesome to do stuff. Please, don't let me colour these findings. It's just a fact that it isn't as good as it used to be. That is not even my opinion. This is research done by Spanish people from Europe. Anyway, number 2. Since the 1960s, the melodies, the rhythms and the vocals of songs have increasingly sounded similar to one another, with many modern pop songs using exactly the same sequence of notes in a given key, from the 5th note to the 3rd and back to the 5th. That is, music has become less harmonically complex. So we've got to ask ourselves, why? Is it because familiar musical sequences that... It's like the difference between slipping into like a lovely tepid bath or punching yourself in the face. I think that's the or get one of those ice baths that everyone's doing. One of those. I'm not sure. It's not a very good analogy, but the research speaks for itself. Harmonically complex, less harmonically complex. I mean, that's, it could be anomalous. They're only looking at 500,000 songs. Anyway, for the past 20 years, music producers have been intentionally making songs louder by using compression effects in the studio. And compression is the process of boosting the quietest parts of a song so that they match the loudest parts, thus reducing the dynamic range or distance between the loudest and the quietest parts. And the effect of this application is to make the entire song sound louder. No matter how loudly the listener sets the volume, it's perceived loudness. And this is done to make a song stand out among a pack of similar sounding songs. For competitive purposes, like this was something that was happening in the advertising trade for a long, long time, and they used to call it sweetening the music, or the audio, and that's why when you'd be watching a film and there'd be like, a nuanced soundtrack, and the dialogue would be sort of, it could be a hushed dialogue, and then it would cut to the adverts, and then you'd get down on super loud in your face, and it was just so that advertisers could grab your attention. But that sort of approach to jingles is now being applied to all pop music. The trade-off is that compression reduces the timbral quality of the song. So, basically it's getting worse. A video from 6 years ago that discussed this very topic had some more observations, like the lyrical quality of songs has gotten worse over the last 10 years. Lyrics have become more mundane and simplified. The second finding was that because technology allows music fans to have access to so many songs, today's pop songs are laden with hooks that appear in a song as soon as possible in order to keep the listener listening. Otherwise, they will skip to the next song. The third finding, the timbral, harmonic and dynamic homogenization, I love that word, of today's pop music, as described above, is a result of risk aversion on the part of the music industry. Because it takes so much money to invest in developing new music talent, many of whom are discovered on talent shows like America's Got the Talent or the X Factor. Record labels want to bet on a sure thing by taking no artistic risks. I think that's something that I saw Amit Ertegun talking about, and saying that they'd hear something that made their ears prick up for whatever reason, and it inspired some sort of aural curiosity in the A&R, which is the artist and repertoire department of a record company. They'd go to the bosses and they'd say, look, I don't know whether this thing's going to fly or not, but there's something about it that I like. And then they'd trust them, and then they'd take a chance on it. And that isn't happening anymore because there's not as much money around. So people don't like taking chances, The music listening public has been brainwashed. These aren't my words, by the way. I'm still on the research. This is the fourth point. And the music listening public has been brainwashed into liking this music because it's being played everywhere. On the radio, in shopping malls, on the internet, in films, and on television shows. The video's narrator describes this as a mir explosion effect, which is a psychological phenomenon by which people develop a preference for things they see and hear often. I always used to talk about the primary effect and the recency effect, but this is the mere exposure effect. More specifically, our brain releases dopamine when we hear a song that we've heard a few times before, and the effect gets stronger with each listen. So as opposed to, like, you hear a song when... So, for example, you hear a song the first time a song is playing, the first time you receive a text message from somebody that you fancy, right? And then you always associate that song with... It's not even that. It's not like a conditional memory thing. It's just repetition. So psychologically, we are being trained to listen to a certain type of music. And why is that? And so here's another writer asked the question, why did this happen? So it's time for some statistical analysis. I'm sorry, this is going on a bit long, but it has to be said. It has to be said. In 1999, the recording industry took home $14.6 billion. After adjusting for inflation, that would be the equivalent of $21.4 billion if it was 2017. And as stated in the previous paragraph, record labels only took home $10 billion in 2017. So in real terms, the revenue of the music industry, or recording industry rather, was cut by half in that 18 years between 99 and 2017. And today, you need to sell your music online, and the owners of these online platforms take enormous cuts from the sales of music, so there's less available for record companies. From a business standpoint, if your revenue drops by 50%, you'd need to reduce costs by 50% to maintain the same level of profitability. So where did the recording industry cut corners in order to... A&R. Artist und Repertoire. The writer of this article met with a former A&R person whose name was Ted. He said, Ted explained to me that this was all because in order to cut costs, the record labels got rid of all the A&R executives who were the de facto ears and gatekeepers of the record labels. He felt that this was a short-sighted cost-cutting measure because a good A&R executive acted as a filter against the hack musicians and as a scout for the rare artist with real talent. He pointed out to me the direct correlation between the layoffs of A&R executives and the deteriorating quality of music being produced by the recording industry. That is, according to Ted, without the A&R executives, the hack musicians have infiltrated the record labels. Speaking of hack musicians, I saw today some footage of one of what I suppose Pat Finnerty and I would probably refer to this artist as the Scheitgeist, because it's just, there's nothing. To me, it just looked like somebody who was ostensibly, or for some reason, perceived as being cool. Maybe he's good looking, or maybe they're I don't know, say some smart things in interviews or whatever, but for whatever reason they were on a stage and it just seemed to be they were shouting, and then they were in a stadium full of idiots who were shouting back at that person, and it was like, what the fuck is this, you know? I mean, I was definitely old man. I was looking at that thinking, give me a cloud to shout at, because this is infuriating. Anyway, what is an A&R executive, also known as artist and repertoire executive? I've talked about this before. So an A&R person finds new acts for record labels, signs them to contracts, and then supervises their artistic development. There's other people in that chain as well. There's things like product managers and so on and so forth. But really, the artistic side of it and the way you, I don't know, develop your persona and your songwriting and that would be under the watchful eye, or, you know, sometimes there'd be intervention, you know, or collaboration at least, between the artist and the A&R executive. And they're not just a point person, because it's not just about the business stuff, it really is about the art. They oversee the recording process, including the selection of producers, songs, singles, and they liaise between the artist and the label. And these largely anonymous gatekeepers have quietly influenced the soundtracks of our lives. I think most people who operate in or around the music trade know at least one A&R guy, and some of them have great reputations, you know, and it's really just about their taste and how they help you to align to their taste, and then their taste is the thing that helps you to catch fire with a wider audience. And the ones that are good, they're great, and it's a sort of it's one of the dark arts, really. Nobody really knows what the skill set is, except, I don't know, self-belief and a willingness to take a chance, I suppose. Anyway, Ted said that the few remaining A&R executives have become risk-averse and less willing to take on promising talent, because he thinks these days A&R executives at major labels are scared to put their life on the line and sign new artists for fear that if a new artist's CD doesn't sell 1 million units, that could be the end of their job. So, is it actually surprising that the music industry keeps pumping out the safe, but let's face it, shitty music? Is it now just a product to make money and nothing else? Well, it always was that. I mean, I don't even think that's a moot question, because I think recorded music that you buy is a product, or even if you stream it, it's more of a service, but it's, I don't know, it's the objective, if you're a record label, is to make money from it. Let's face that. Its value, though, seems to have become more as a commodity as opposed to an art. And how can this change? I mean, there are people out there doing it right. There are people who are making harmonically diverse. There's people out there doing great stuff, and I think the search is on, and the search will continue. It just makes my job more interesting, because when I find stuff that's really great and fun to listen to and enjoyable to talk about, it's, you know, it's a rare and precious treat. When you think of the 180,000 new songs released every day, and 179,999 of them are shit. Not my word. Actually, they were my words. But that's supported by research now. This was a bit of a long one and a bit of a talky one, but please use the comment section below to tell me what you think about all this stuff. bear in mind that whilst I was colouring some of that with my opinion, that's research, actual research, algorithmic research, almost statistical analysis of the prevailing music on the airwaves today. And I know another argument is, who gives a fuck about the radio? I mean, I'm of that camp too. Nobody cares. But when you're talking about stuff that you don't elect to listen to, if you're walking down the road, if you're working on a building site, that kind of thing, you know, you're just going to, 9 times out of 10, they stick the radio on, and that's what you have to listen to. And if that's how they brainwash us, there's no hope. There's no hope. Turn off the radio, guys. Turn it off. You don't need that. Make some considered decisions about what you put into your ears, because you are being brainwashed. And this research supports that theory, that assertion, that dystopian reality that we live within. Anyway, I love you guys. Thanks a lot for listening. Justin Hawkins rides again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, watch one of these 2 videos, and don't eat that slop they're feeding you. Let's forage for more and better music. Use the comment section below if you find anything cool. Cheers, guys. Okay.